Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome back to the second series of the Scots Care podcast. Scots Care is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots in London through a range of support, including financial grants, advocacy, counselling and sheltered housing for older Scots, job coaching, social events, befriending, and support for children and families. The charity's been running for 400 years to help break the cycle of poverty experienced by some Scots. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all walks of life, from celebrities and authors, athletes and actors, business entrepreneurs to academics, all with one thing in common: Scots heritage. And they enjoy a good blether. On the podcast this week is Cynnych MacLeod, also known as the Hebridean Baker. Cynnych has been Scotland's best-selling cookbook author for the past 3 years with his 3 books, most recently with his 2023 book, Hebridean Baker at Home. It all began with him sharing traditional stories and recipes online, and since then, 28 million people around the world have watched them. Elle magazine called Cynnych very Scottish, very sexy, very outlander. In our wide-ranging chat, we spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about growing up on the island of Lewis and the boarding school that he hated. We chatted about global travel and life before he returned to Scotland and became the Hebridean Baker. Cynnych was very open about being an ambassador for the LGBT community and how proud he is to take on this role. We also spoke about how he invented cock-a-leekie pie, completely by accident, and how heartbroken he was when he finished second in the World Porridge Making Championships. He truly was a wonderful interviewee. So here we go on the Scots Care podcast with Cynnych MacLeod, the Hebridean Baker.
Scots Care, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Kenneth, thank you for joining the Scots Care podcast today.
Great to be with you, Marcus.
For anybody who doesn't know you, can you explain, especially for anyone who's not Scottish, where you live?
Yeah, so I'm from the farthest north of the Outer Hebrides, the island of Lewis. And we always say we're not remote, we're just very, very far away.
That's a good... Do you know what? It was just this morning I was sitting there and I was thinking, I wonder how many people live on Lewis, how many people live on Harris. And it was more than I thought, actually, because I asked Alexa and she says 18,500 people live on Lewis.
Yeah, the core of them live in the town of Stornoway, which is the only town in the Outer Hebrides. And then the rest of the islands, like the village I'm from of Cromoar, which what I love about the names of the villages, they very much take our two cultures, the kind of Viking or Nordic culture that came first, and then the Gaelic or Gaelic culture that came from there. So crow is the Old Norse word for a cow, and moor is big. So I'm from Big Cow. The next village is Crowbeck, which is wee cow. So I think that kind of sums up what is thought of our villages. But they're small villages, still very much community driven. But the islands are big. You know, it's the biggest as in landmass in the British Isles. So we're a big fish in a wee pond, whatever.
Do you know, I asked this to someone else on the podcast recently, Russell Douglas, who's head of the Scottish Business Network. But have you ever done your DNA?
I have.
Because my wife got it for me as a present, and I did it, and I wasn't. Maybe this is a terrible thing. I don't think I was terribly interesting. I was very Scottish. I was very kind of Scandinavian and Scottish, and a bit of Viking. It was when you mentioned Vikings that kind of brought it. And my wife had much more interest in Jewish European background. What did yours throw up when you did it?
Well, to be honest with you, I think, Marcus, I was probably the same as you, and I found that very exciting and interesting, and not I should say, not too surprising. Actually, in the one I chose, the Hebrides were actually part of Norway. So I think I was like 87% Norwegian. But that absolutely makes sense for us. You know, the Vikings came in about 800 and stayed quite happily for 400 years until Scotland bought the Hebrides off Norway for, was it about 4,000 merks, which I think is about £3.50. I think they got a good deal, Marcus. What do you think?
You know what? I did. There you go. Every day's a school day. I didn't know that. I didn't know that Scotland, United Kingdom, didn't originally own the Hebrides.
That's right. Yeah, it was
Oh,
the Treaty of Perth, 1266. And still, Scotland must pay Norway £100 every year to keep the Hebrides as part of Scotland. There you go.
that's fascinating, isn't it? The things you learn. And it sounds like you had a relatively traditional upbringing. Your dad was a fisherman. Your mum was a weaver of Harris tweed. And what were your school days like? Did you go to a small school, or were you born? Do you live in Harris, but you were born in Lewis, or is it the other way around?
No, Lewis born and bred, but when you go to the top of the hill behind my house, you can look in the Harris Hills or the Lewis Hills. So I
Oh,
feel connected to both. But yeah, a very, very traditional background. And in that classic way, when you don't know what you don't know, you assume life is the same for everybody. And so I didn't know that people went to the cinema and did all these fun things that kids do together. My life was very much centered about the village and village life. And it was fantastic as a result of that. School was, I mean, primary school had about 21 kids in it. But then, of course, you head to the big town of Stornoway for your high school. And we were too far away from Stornoway, so I had to board in Stornoway, which for anybody who has to do that is the most awful experience. I don't know if anybody comes out of that in a positive way, and probably still scars me, to this day. But that was life. That's how it had to happen, you know.
that's a tremendous culture shock, that isn't it? From a village and a tight knit family to being kind of ripped away from it. And yeah, I think when I was growing up, I grew up in Clydebank, just outside Glasgow, and I googled that as well. That's got 26,000 people in it. And I think what frustrated me when I was a kid and we would watch Blue Peter, and it would say, "Oh, and this exhibition is on for the next 5 weeks at the National History Museum," and everything was kind of London based. So you might as well say it's on for the next 6 weeks on the moon, because when we grown up in Clydebank in the 70s, you were never going to go to London. So I mean, it must have been kind of the same for you. When you were growing up, or as you kind of got older, was there did you want to leave the island? Do you want to find the big city?
Yeah, for sure. I think there is through the generations there has been a need, well, be it forced or a desire for islanders to leave the island. You know, I'm talking in from the clearances to education to work. But and so I absolutely felt that. I knew I didn't want to take after my father and be a fisherman. I knew I had other adventures in me. I didn't know what they were going to be at the time, but I certainly felt the drive to take me away. And the main way to do that was to do well at school and to get to university. And that still wasn't that common, you know? And so to be given that opportunity, and I came to the amazing city of Glasgow to do that. And even though you're away, you're always an islander. There's a beautiful Gaelic word. Well, there's two. One is Cianalus and one is Dulchus. And they both talk about a sense of place, a longing for somewhere. And for us, it's to be back home in the Hebrides. And, you know, I meet so many islanders or people, even people just from my own island when I'm traveling for book tours and all those amazing things that I do. And the connection islanders have. It's actually quite emotional. I see a lot of emotion in people when I'm telling stories of home, but I'm in Vancouver or Chicago or something like that. And you can just sense them going, I want to go home. It's time to go home. And that's nice.
It's weird, that, isn't it? It's almost like something that just, it's like a ticking time bomb inside you. I think I spent the first half of my life trying to get out of where I lived, and I've probably spent the last 10 or 15 years trying to get back because of lack of support and lack of community. And maybe it's as I sense my own mortality, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but you're looking for something to belong to, something to cling on to. So what age did you go back to the island?
So I was very lucky. I had some amazing adventures in my early life. I actually moved after university to Russia. I um, applied for a job and surprisingly got it working at the Moscow Times, which is a English language newspaper for Eastern Europe, and spent a couple of years out there, which really did shape and change my life considerably. I'm trying to think what kind of person I would be if I didn't have that experience. Then moved on to Australia and lived there for some time as well. So it wasn't until my kind of 30s that I was really had that keenness, that desire, and that draw to come back. But as I said, it even if you're not at home, there's still a connection. There's still something that makes you an islander that never goes away.
Yeah. You know what? I think that does extend to just generally a Scottish thing as well. I think, no matter where you are, if you meet another Scottish person, it's, what part of Scotland are you from and where were your parents from? But when we were kids, we had friends that lived in Benbecula, and we used to go to Benbecula a lot. And there was something about it that I've never been back since I was probably about 10, but it wasn't like going to a rural place or a countryside place. There was something almost otherworldly about it, which was just, there was a beauty that kind of transcended just going to the countryside that I've never been able to put my finger on since then. It's an amazing place.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to say one of my jobs. That sounds wrong, but one of the things I hope to happen from being the Hebridean Baker and all the adventures I have is just putting a spotlight on an amazing part of the world. One that sometimes even, as you say, if you're from Clydebank, you don't know much about, be it we are so proudly Scottish, but we are different, culturally we're different, our language is different, our landscapes are different. And so sometimes we have to check ourselves to remember we're part of a bigger country of Scotland, because we do feel we have influences from the north as much as from the south. But it is a very special place.
Scots Care, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
It's interesting now that I'm speaking to you. Not that your books didn't make sense to me. They always. I love the cookbooks. Scotland's best-selling cookbook author for the last 3 years. But now that you can explaining your backstory to me, I kind of understand, because there's much more than just a recipe. So when you pitched this, were the publishers open to it? Because there's a lot more width than just a cookbook. It is about, it's about history and feelings and places. And did you go to a publisher and say, this is kind of what I want to do?
Well, luckily for me, it actually happened the other way around. The publishers came to me, and I can't explain how unexpected this whole thing has been, Marcus. I started this genuinely. I was over visiting my auntie Bellac, who's 95, still bakes nearly every day, and she was making definitely the Hebrides' most classic recipe, which is a duff, or as you call it, a clootie dumpling on the mainland. And it happened to be her 65th wedding anniversary that day. And she was just telling stories of the wedding and, all the traditions. And I went home that night thinking, I didn't know these stories. I didn't know her recipe for clootie dumpling. And I thought, what if I start to share these recipes with the islanders? I genuinely just thought other islanders would find this interesting. Sometimes I told the stories in Gaelic, sometimes in English. But very quickly, I realized they were resonating across the world. And so it was only a few months later, then out of the blue, I get this email from a publisher saying, have you ever thought about writing a cookbook? And at the time, genuinely, and I still feel maybe this is the case, I use food as a conduit to talk about our culture, our language, and the amazing islands of the Hebrides. So it wasn't in my mind, but the moment, I think I played it cool and didn't reply for, I don't know, 6 seconds. And it literally, the rest is history. It has been the most unbelievable adventure that I pinch myself every day, because the opportunities I have, or even the fact that people would even know, shout at me in the street, hi, Hebridean Baker, or all these things. It's remarkable.
I think it's interesting that even aside from this fantastic, success that you have, that you're so modest about, is that it's so important that you preserve this recipe for clootie dumpling, because I think we kind of forget it as you get older. And, my dad passed away during COVID, and I don't mean this as a sadness, but there's so many questions I have these days that I didn't get a chance to ask him, just everyday things. You just think, oh, my ancestors and my Uncle Bobby or whoever it was. And then you think there's nobody there to answer these questions anymore. And to a certain extent, it's not your obligation, but it's great that you have taken this recipe that your auntie's been baking for the last 60, 70 years, and you're kind of preserving it for the future.
I hope so. And I do that with the recipes. I definitely do that with the stories. I don't think there is a loch or a hill or a valley in the Hebrides that doesn't have some kind of monster or giant or, wee fairy or something that lives in them. And I just think those kind of stories can get easily lost. The names of, the Gaelic names, like there's a loch quite near my house called Lochanari and Unaige, the loch of the one night shilling, and it's quite a scary story, about these two sisters, and there's, and on the way back there's the hill of the drop of blood, and you say these in Gaelic, and you forget why they were called these things in the first place, and so trying to preserve these stories, the recipes, and I was quite lucky, I'm sitting here, you can see my bookcase behind me. Well, actually, what you can see, I made this bookcase when it was cool to present your CDs. I'm so glad,
CDs, yeah.
I'm so glad this is a podcast, because I don't want people to know how terrible my music taste was in 2002. Not that it's got much better, but up there is a book called The Scots Kitchen, which was written in 1929 by F. Marion McNeill. And I wouldn't say it was the first time, but certainly it was one of the moments when, even in 1929, this lady who was based in Orkney at the time was concerned about what's the right word? I don't know, homogenization, or just the kind of that just the culture of Scotland was just being lost kind of to other cultures. And she went round the country finding recipes, finding stories, and I take a lot of inspiration from that. And if I've done 1% of what F. Marion McNeill has done, I'll be delighted.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I do worry about homogenization just in general. You go to any major European city and you get off and there's a Starbucks and a Pret a Manger and stuff, and it scares me, especially where you feel loyal to Scotland and you want everything to be preserved as best as it can. Can I ask you about your cooking? And because you've taken kind of many traditional dishes and you kind of give them a 21st century twist, and lemon curd tiramisu, that kind of stuff, drunken crumble. But it made me think of my dad again, because I was thinking my dad used to make soups. We grew up, his thing was soups, and he was always experimenting with soup. And one that stuck in my mind was he wanted to make this potato soup, and we didn't have any potatoes, so he put chips in it. And it doesn't end with me going, and this was the best soup ever. It was horrible. It was chips. And I just wonder, even at your level of expertise now, is there stuff that you go and you might present it to Peter, your partner, and he just goes, "Oh, no, this is not going anywhere near a book"?
Well, Rarely, and maybe I'm lucky that Peter, I should say he's got the title of the official Hebridean Baker cake taster, so he gets a lot of test cakes. But I nearly will tell nearly the opposite story. I remember one time, and it's a soup story. So I think this must have been book two, and I've got an amazing photographer, Susie Lowe. She's an absolute superstar and really brings to life not only the recipes but the visuals of the Hebrides. And I was walking into the studio with my cockalakey soup. And for those of you who don't know, cockalakey is a very traditional Scottish dish, and it's got three main ingredients: chicken, leeks, and prunes. And I'm walking in, and she says, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's my cockalakey soup." And she went, "Oh." And I went, "What do you mean, oh?" And she goes, "Do you know what, Cannioch? It's really hard to photograph." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Well, think about it. You've got a white bowl and a clear broth and a wee brown prune floating on the top." And not that I need to describe what that could be like,
Yeah.
but I thought to myself, okay, I think this cookbook's got 74 recipes, not 75. And then that night, I was telling that story to Peter and a few friends who were over, and I was making them dinner, and I had all this chicken, all this leeks, all these prunes. And so I thought, I'll need to use this up. So I thought, why don't I slow cook this into a pie filling and make a pastry? And they're all sitting around the table. And I said, "What's that like?" And Peter's like, "This is the best thing you've ever made." And
Wow.
the prunes just melted into the sweet sauce. And I said, "Should I put it in the book?" And he goes, "You've got to put this in the book." And that's where cockalakey pie came about.
That's great,
And
isn't it?
I love when, like, one of my favorite things, obviously, on Instagram and all those things, that when people tag you and say, "Just made this, just made that," and somehow you never know what's going to land. You never know what's going to land, but the cockalakey pie just makes people smile. I don't know what it is, and it's made across the world.
Whereas it's a wonderful reinvention. I really like that. I speaking to a guy called Greg Boyd recently, and he runs Old Hag, and they've opened a Scottish shop in North London.
Can't wait to go.
He's doing really well, and he's kind of reinvented macaroni pies, and he makes his own pie base, and then I think he uses cheese from the Hebrides and mustard as well. And they are it's a brilliant, like you, this kind of reinvention of traditional food. It's great. Now I want to talk to you something else that's traditional. I want to talk to you about porridge. I want to talk to you about why you finished second in the World Porridge Championships. That was stolen from you.
Heartbroken. Heartbroken. I've never. Okay, so the World Porridge Championships are an annual event and a pretty big deal, to be fair, in the culinary world. And this was in the very early days of Hebridean Baker. And I entered with, you basically had to create a recipe that really showcased oats. But as a baker, I was trying to do that through a kind of a sweet way. So I made my version of a baked Alaska. So a baked oat Alaska. I made, if you know that the three layers of this is a sponge, an ice cream, and a meringue. So I made a honey, raspberry, and oat sponge. I made a vanilla ice cream with a pinhead oat brittle, and then a classic meringue on top. And I think there was something crazy like 1,000 entries that year. And they
Wow.
announced them in reverse order from 20, the top 20. And so I was watching online, and I think I got to 10th, and I was like, I'm going to switch off now. If I didn't get 20 to 10, I'm going to go away. And so I went away and did stuff, and then my nose got too long. So I wanted to come back, and I think I was on fifth, and I checked. I hadn't been ninth, eighth, seventh, sixth, fifth, no, fourth, no, third, no. But then suddenly it wasn't despondence. It was actually, hold on, what if I win this? So there was a sudden euphoria of there's only two people left out of this 1,000, and what if I'm one of them? And I have to say, I think I would have preferred to have come 920th because coming second was heartbreaking. Um, Even though it instantly got a lot of media because that year I was the only Scottish person in the top 10.
Wow.
And there was a lot of headlines, has Scotland lost the knack of porridge? What's happened to porridge in Scotland? So I was beaten or pipped even at the post by a lady from the Netherlands. And, I think sometimes coming second, there's lots of people who've come second in things and it hasn't hurt their careers. So I think I'm doing okay.
It's interesting you're talking about a sweet thing. My mum used to put salt in her porridge. Is that a Scottish thing?
Yeah, I mean, I just literally had my porridge before we started chatting. I have porridge every morning. Actually, I would eat porridge 3 times a day. I think I did a Danish radio show once, and they said, "What's your favorite, kind of ingredient?" And I said 100% oats. Like I love oats so much, all different types of oats. And they said, "Do you think you could live just on oats?" And I was like, absolutely, I could. And I made a savory oat recipe, which was sort of like a brunch risotto, where I cooked the oats in vegetable stock. And, I had pancetta and spring onion and goat cheese. And
That sounds fantastic.
delicious, delicious.
Yeah, well, from a serious point of view, oats are very good for you. They lower your cholesterol, high in fiber. I think we should all eat more oats if we can.
I really do encourage it. I think it's a wonderful thing and something that we should be very proud of in Scotland because we make the best.
Did you know Scots Care provides homes for older Scots across London? If you or yours are finding it hard to find a home, we've close on 100 high-quality sheltered housing flats to help make a fresh start.
Can I ask you about restraint? Because, you make stuff like double dram cake and marmalade shortbread, but are you like the cook who feeds others? Are you good I think if I had your talent, I'd be the size of a house. And I think that'd be my problem because and my wife always says this to me. She says, you have no restraint. If there's biscuits in the house, I will eat them till they're gone, kind of. That's the problem.
Well, I'm kind of the same as you, Marcus. I have the sweetest tooth in the world and I have dessert every single night that I make. But yes, I am, it's maybe sounds a negative thing being a feeder, but I don't mean it like that. Like I love people coming around to the house. People kind of say to me, do you not want a night off? Can we not cook for you? I'm like, no, come round. I love it. I spend the whole day preparing. And as I said, it's just my favorite thing to do. And luckily for Peter, his favorite thing to do is eat. And so, the fact that I make, these wonderful meals from scratch, I've never had a takeaway in my life.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not some kind of puritanical, I don't know, Presbyterian kind of thing. It's just, it doesn't appeal. I always feel it's, I don't know. If somebody says, but it only takes 15 minutes and they'll arrive at the door, I can say, I can make you something amazing in 15 minutes. I promise you, or 12 minutes even. So I just love the process of cooking, and it can be simple, but it's just definitely part of my DNA.
Are you still living part of your year off grid? Because I read you and Peter do that. I just wondered, does that make you more active as well? Does that help you keep in shape? Because I read that you and Peter go to, is it an island? And the only way you can actually get there is by canoe. I mean, that sounds, and tell me, how just off grid are you? Or do you now have a mansion with a swimming pool now that you're hugely famous?
No swimming pools, no mansions, no. But our hut is, well, it couldn't be anything different from that. So hutting is a lifestyle as much as a place. Hutting means that you are off grid, which means no running water or no mains electricity or mains water. It needs to be smaller than 30 square meters. So it's probably about the size of the room you're in right now, Marcus. And the goal behind it is to be as self-sustainable as possible. And it's very much a lifestyle we love. Yes, we can only get there by canoe. And so that does keep you, if you want to go to the shop to get something or a wee treat, there's quite an endurance to go and get a Mars bar. You've got a 40-minute round trip in the canoe to get to the nearest shop. But it's very special indeed. And in a positive, I say this in a good way, my life has changed so much. And, I will be on a North American tour in a different city every day, flying to a different place, on a TV show in the morning, doing meet and greets in the afternoon, and then an event for 300 people in the evening, and signing for 2, 3, 4 hours. So when I get home, to be able to get in that canoe and paddle up, and just everything changes. Like there's 3 herons that live on the way between where we have the canoe and where the hut is. And when you start to see the herons just go, oh, you're back, and they kind of fly away, and then you get there and we've got a big stove, put the fire on, and you just go, ah. And it's not one of those wistful me sitting at the window reading a book kind of things. You still work, you're chopping wood, you're going out to the creels to see if there's a lobster, you're sorting out the veg plot, you're all those things, but it's just different. It's different work, and very rewarding, and it's fantastic. Love it.
Yeah, I think we have lost, and even like I've got 3 kids, and my oldest boy is 15, and he has no ability whatsoever to do. It worries me. He has no ability to sit still without a phone or a tablet. And I was reading this kind of a strange segue, but I was reading Rupert Everett's autobiography, and he was talking about, as a younger man, being taught to sit still and have a glass of wine in a cafe and watch the world go by. And because I think we're all very guilty of, as soon as you get up to go to the bar or go to the toilet, I'll get my phone out and I'll be checking my emails. And so I feel envy for what you have there, and that's good that you have this ability to detach. But then at the same time, as you say, you're still working, physically working, chop wood, carry water, that kind of thing. But now that you are who you are, and you're also a bit of a TikTok phenomenon, because where are your TikToks here? I've got them here. You've got 250,000 people following you, and you've got millions of views on it. Do you feel a pressure that even when you go to the island that you've got to be punting out the TikToks? Do you have agents or people after you saying you've not done enough social media this week?
Yeah, there is. No, you're right. There is a pressure. I'm writing another book at the moment, and there's this kind of multifaceted kind of marketing you've got to do, and even though I'm spending probably 20 hours a day on this book, you still then go, oh, I need to share some of my story. I need to do some interviews. I need to do these things. So it's definitely more than I anticipated. It's not just you can't just be an author. You need to be a marketeer. You need to be a brand person. You need to travel. You're nearly like a traveling salesman. For 2 months of after the book comes out, you're driving up to Wick, then you're driving down to Dumfries, then you're up to Aberdeen the next day, then you're getting the boat to Mull to tell the stories, and then you go down to London to be on this morning.
Here's you being very modest again. Here's you being talking about Mull or wherever, but you have sellout tours of North America, which so when you go away to North America, how does that work for your family life? Does Peter come with you?
He sometimes does, and it's brilliant when he comes with me, because you talk about the social media side of things, and he's very much been part of the storyline, and people love to see Peter too. They're so excited to see us both. And we've always, since we met, we've sang together. We actually were very fortunate to enter the Royal National Mod as a duet, as a male duet, and we were the first male duet to win the mod for, I think 1968 was the last time a male duet won the mod. And so we always perform a Gaelic song, and those kind of things are very culturally important to us both. It might be the first time, I would say we're in Minneapolis or I don't know, I was recently in Portland, and it might be the first time somebody's even heard that there is a language called Gaelic or that people speak it. And it's our day-to-day, language at our home. And that you can sing in it. And I always put a baking playlist in the back of all of my books, because I think to myself, what they might listen to Julie Fowlis or Kim Carney or Karen Matheson and then go, this is beautiful. It doesn't need to be in my language. And they start to deep dive into Gaelic music. Gaelic music is a great way to get into the language. And now with Duolingo and Speak Gaelic and all these ways to learn the language, I feel amazing that people have started to learn the language because of the Hebridean Baker.
You are a great ambassador for Scotland and for the Hebrides. And can I just, there's a quote here, you might have been slightly misquoted, so it might have paraphrased, and it says, unintentionally, this is you, we really have impacted a lot on the LGBT community in rural Scotland, because for probably one of the first times they've had someone from the islands who has, stood out and told their story. And it's not something that you never set out to do this, did you? But it's something that you're obviously quite proud of.
Oh my goodness, amazing, actually, Marcus. And again, that real kind of 360, growing up anywhere different is tough. Growing up different on a wee island, I do think geography does enhance that. And it was not easy. Like, it really was really difficult growing up, knowing that you were different, and that classic thing that everybody else knew before you did. And so it became natural to try and hide part of my personality. But with the Hebridean Baker, it seemed in the beginning it wasn't me trying to share this intentionally, but obviously Peter's my life, so he was there in every video. He was, part of everything. And I would say I probably get as many letters, because I still get letters, which I love. I get emails, I get messages, but I still get letters as well, and cards and things. And I get as many people writing to me about their struggles, even as a kind of maturer member of the LGBT community, and how I've helped them feel more positive and more able to be themselves, as I do people asking about recipes or tell me about my clootie dumpling. And that's kind of amazing. Like, it is. Yeah. And I was very fortunate last year to win the Culture Award at the LGBT Awards in Scotland. It was me and the new Doctor Who. And I thought to myself, again, I used to pretend I was Doctor Who when I was like 10 years old. So to be winning an award with the new Doctor Who at the same time, absolute pinch me moments.
Well, he is very, is it? I tried to get my head around his name. Is it Shuti? It's pronounced Shuti Gatwa. Yeah, he's a very cool man.
And so again, with everything I do, I think to myself, if one person visits the Hebrides because of my stories, if one person learns Gaelic because of me telling them about it, if one person feels more comfortable in their lifestyle, whatever that lifestyle is, that because I've shared mine, isn't that just amazing that I somehow can have this influence? And this influence, I don't take it lightly at all. One of my first, we talked about the North American tours, And this was a tough thing to hear. I remember I was in Boston and myself and Peter were having fun. We were telling stories, and there's maybe I had a couple of hundred people at the event. And this lady, just in the middle of one of my stories, just stood up and she said, "I'm really sorry, everybody." And everybody, we were surprised. No, we kind of looked around and she goes, if I don't tell this story now, I'm never going to be able to tell it. Because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here tonight. And she said that during COVID, her husband had died, and she was having a really tough time. And one night she had decided that life wasn't worth living anymore. And I picked up her phone to write to her daughter a final message before she was deciding how to end her own life. And just as she picked up the phone, her daughter had sent her a message. And the message was, "Have you seen this guy on TikTok? I think you'll like him." And she didn't mean to click the message. It's just the way the message came up. She pressed the message and the link by mistake. And it was the Hebridean Baker. And she watched the first video and she watched the second. And then an hour later, she realized she had sat there smiling and laughing and crying and suddenly felt part of the world again. And she said to everybody there that she realized that there were still good people in the world and maybe she should stay in the world as well. And to think that just through recipes or stories or just hopefully being a positive role model that I've been able to have such an influence is, unbelievable.
In one way, you could say that's quite a heavy crown to wear as far as you're concerned, but you sound like the kind of man who has the pragmatism to understand, you can't change people's lives, but you can go out there and do what you're doing and hopefully they can feel a bit better about it. And can I just ask you finally, you have had a lot of success, and has it afforded you anything? Because as we've chatted, I can still see those terrible CDs behind you. Have you afforded yourself any luxury? Has that changed you? You don't drive a Maserati around Harris or anything?
No, I drive a blue Ford van that usually has either books or Pete's or something in the back. Have I got any luxury since this happened? Do you know what? I don't know if I have. I like it, but only because it's really not the way I'm wired at all. It's just maybe I should just treat myself to something, but I've never ever been money driven at all, and maybe I should be more. I don't know, but what this has afforded me to do is have adventures that I never imagined. Like, I can't describe what it's like to arrive into a theater in Washington, D.C. and have 300 people kind of scream as if I'm Tom Jones, walking into the room. Or to, I don't know, recently I was on Tarancy, the island of Tarancy, making mince and tatties for 2 of the hobbits from Lord of the Rings, or making cocktails in Kirsty Allsop's house in Devon. And the good thing is I'm not 21, so I can chuckle and realize these are just hilarious things that, shouldn't be happening to me.
I saw Martin Compston talking about you and saying how cool you were. And Elle magazine described you as very sexy, very outlander. That's I like that.
I mean, I said, luckily there's a podcast because the camera does lie.
Not at all.
No, it's amazing. And I will never take it for granted. And as Peter says, you're going to be the Hebridean Baker for the rest of your life. You'll be in a retirement home and some wee gran will walk over to you and say, "You're the Hebridean Baker." And that's amazing.
Kenneth, thank you very much for joining us today. I've really appreciated. You've been a joy to speak to. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks, Marcus.
Scots Care, supporting Scots in need in London. You can make a real difference to our clients through a monthly donation of any amount. Simply visit scotscare.com and click donate to get started.